Greetings from Tokyo. My name is Daisuke Beppu. I hope you are all having a really nice day today. Continuing with my discussion of the films that have been released by the Criterion Collection, I'd like to take this opportunity to make some comments about the release that is Spine number 10. Walkabout. This is a film from 1971, directed by a gentleman whose name is Nicholas Roeg. It stars Jenny Agutter and Luke Roeg, and also stars David Gopilil in three very interesting performances. We're talking about young people, in particular a young teenage girl and a young Aboriginal boy, and they don't speak the same language, but they bond in this Australian wilderness, this desert, where the young girl and her little brother have been essentially stranded, and they're trying to make it back to civilization. This film is therefore a very interesting and symbolic film about the growth from childhood into adulthood and the journey from childhood into adulthood as seen manifested in this tale told visually in terms of these people who are stranded in the wilderness, just trying to go from place to place, and for this young girl and her little brother anyway to return to civilization and what that eventually means. The Criterion Collection Blu-ray that I have here is a very nice presentation. It has an audio commentary by director Nicholas Roeg and star Jenny Agutter. I don't think they were recording the commentary portions in the same place, so I think it's one of those situations where the commentary has the clips from Nicholas Roeg and the clips from Jenny Agutter edited together into one seemingly seamless commentary track, which is perfectly fine. It's a very nice and informative commentary track. There's also a wonderful interview with Jenny Agutter, talking about many details surrounding her casting and production details, and also the actor Luke Roeg, who is the son of Nicholas Roeg, and he also plays the little boy, the brother of the Jenny Agutter character. And then there is a wonderful documentary about David Gopilil called Gopilil, One Red Blood, and this is from 2002. It's a really informative look at this very charismatic and fascinating actor. And then we have a theatrical trailer to round out the supplements. So, my friends, as usual, I will speak about details of this film. So if you haven't seen this film, please take there's no need to rush, so you can just stop this video right now and please come back at any time when you have seen the film. It is certainly worthwhile, and I hope you come back, and when you've seen the film, we can continue this discussion going forward. This is a film that is set in nature, that is set in this Australian desert wilderness, and we've got these really kind of almost eerie shots of animals, wildlife, scorpions, lizards, carrion flies eating flesh. There's a real sense of the observations of nature, and yet the film is not in the style of, let's say, a nature documentary or anything like that. On the contrary, it is a very stylized visual treat, and the context with which this style exists is very interesting, because we are dealing with, I think, a very fairly heavily stylized visual film that is telling, in essence, a very simple story of these two kids, siblings, trying to make it back to civilization after they've been basically stranded by their father, who's seemingly gone crazy and has tried to kill them, and he ends up killing himself, and their car is destroyed. So the only hope for these two children is essentially to go back to civilization on their own. It's a really just a simple tale, and based on that, we can, as viewers, look at this in many different ways in terms of a metaphor. So we can look at it in terms of the idea of being stranded in sort of hostile country, trying to make it back to more civilized society, which I think is a superficial way of looking at it, but I don't think it's the only way. I think probably the more meaningful approach and interpretation to this film is dealing with the idea of youth and growing up into adulthood and the process by which that occurs. And that occurs in terms of physical changes, sometimes in the context of maybe pain or struggle, and that struggle, it can also be transposed into kind of a mental or emotional struggle. And it also can be seen in terms of an awakening, in terms of a physical awakening, a mental awakening, a spiritual and sexual awakening. So I think these two poles suggest a mixed bag, or perhaps a better way of putting it, an experience of growth that can be both positive and negative. And I think that's a wonderful way to view this film, because the film is not in any way one note. It doesn't, in other words, it doesn't suggest one note of bleakness or one note of tragedy. At the same time, it doesn't suggest one note of optimism or one note of sort of cheery brightness. I think it forms a really nice balance between these two poles in terms of the visual style of the film. You know, sometimes the shots can be quite eerie and scary in terms of quite immediate and extreme close-ups on things, with the soundtrack turned up in intensity, and you hear the clickety-clack of bugs crawling or scorpions snapping, and these sorts of scary or potentially scary images. But at the same time, we get these beautiful sort of shots of vista and the horizon, and a lovely musical score by John Barry, which helps to punctuate these shots of beauty. And we have also this contrast, I think, existing within the context of the human growth and the emotional growth and the character growth of these of these characters. So I think this is a real nice juxtaposition that's being formed here. Really nice indeed. I'm very pleased that the film takes this balanced approach. The interesting thing about this as well is that the film doesn't provide much setup in terms of a narrative setup with these kids. The kids come in and we see quick shots of them in civilized society, in the context of school and their father and a little bit of their home life. But then immediately we are thrust into the car driving into this empty landscape, and then the premise is that the family is supposed to be there for a picnic, but the father, unfortunately, for whatever reason, which is not expressly given, seems to snap and tries to kill the kids, and he ends up just killing himself. So there isn't really much there in terms of a strict narrative focus that leads to this particular predicament of these children. And I think that's really nice, because it just thrusts us into this world, which is one giant metaphor. So we don't have to worry about the excess baggage of any narrative that could, or narrative details or considerations that could otherwise bog the film down. We are just given this setup, and then off we go into the wilderness, so to speak. So I really like that. I like that carefree attitude that the film presents us, and we are then allowed to enjoy or be frightened by or be concerned with these images of these children as they're traversing this very dangerous terrain. And we see points where they are struggling for water, and they're obviously very physically fatigued, and they at one point we don't know if they're going to survive because it's a very dangerous rocky terrain. They find a little patch of water, but the water dries up soon afterwards. They find some fruit, but then the fruit disappears. So there is not much hope at some points of the film. So we don't quite know if the children are going to survive this. But then from the distance, we see the emergence of the David Gopilil character coming in, and he is the one that helps them through. And through this adventure, or this setup, these children bond as they, and especially the David Gopilil character and the Jenny Agutter character, they bond and they seem to have some kind of connection that is occurring. So this is the setup of what is essentially one great big metaphor for youth and growing up into adulthood. Now, there are scenes I think there are scenes that show this very expressly and explicitly, that are quite, how should I put it? I think they are considered controversial, and perhaps rightly so. There are scenes, for instance, of David Gopil's character hunting, and we see him shooting at kangaroos, live kangaroos, and he's actually shooting a spear, and then they're dying, and they are dead. We also see other characters, other unknown characters do it, hunting animals and then cutting the throats, and blood is coming out of them. So these are real animals that are being hunted, apparently. So there's a lot of animal violence that is occurring. Of course, I think the animal violence and the hunting is, I think, just meant to show us the idea, the natural instincts of man to survive, and his ability to control his environment and to survive with a certain sense of, let's say, skill or a certain sense of knowledge. But that being said, these scenes, I think, are quite disturbing to watch even now, because these are real live animals that are being killed before our very eyes, and quite violently so. So although I think there's a certain metaphorical utility and purpose behind these images, I can't help but feel very disturbed by them all the same. And also there's the very famous or infamous scene around the middle of the film where you have Jenny Agutter's character swimming in this kind of little pond, and she is naked, and there's beautiful music, and we see her body swimming through the ripples of the water, and we see this intercut with David Gopil's character out in the wild hunting, and we also see shots of the little boy, the brother, but basically the focus is on the Jenny Agutter's character swimming. And so on the one hand, we have this girl who is naked swimming, so there is a certain sexual element to this, which is, or has the potential for being controversial because of the age of the actress, but at the same time, as a piece of art, I think it's meant to show the idea that she, as a character, is free and happy in that particular moment in the middle of a film, which is about her in a state of physical and emotional duress. And also, it is undoubtedly a scene of she is one with nature, and yes, she is a character that is undergoing, I think, a sexual awakening in a certain sense, not in terms of any actual act of intercourse, which is never depicted, but in terms of her own, let's say, emotional feelings that are being perhaps stimulated by her time with this young boy. And we do see this elsewhere in the film when they are looking at each other, or when he is looking at her, or when she's looking at him. There is a certain suggestion that there is a sexual awakening that is occurring. Whether that is due to the fact that these two are attracted to each other sexually, I think, is another issue, but it is occurring. And I think that is the film is taking that to be kind of a natural progression in terms of this context of a story of a young woman or young man growing into adulthood. So in that sense, I think it's a very it's quite a fascinating sequence in the middle of the film. One thing also is fascinating is that the young girl, the Jenny Aguter's character, she has a real dual role here. She serves not only as the character of the young girl, but she's also like a mother figure, not just a sister figure, but a real mother figure to the young boy, the Luke Rowe character, and so her brother. And so I really find that to be a fascinating dynamic between the siblings. And she's always trying to kind of hide the truth from him. She never tells him that the father killed himself. She's always saying, the father wants us to, we'll see him on ahead. So she's always lying to him to kind of protect him and to protect his innocence. It's only towards the end of the film when they kind of reach civilization, and it's the boy who says, talks about the death of the father and why he killed himself. So in fact, the boy already knows about the fate of the father, and which is an interesting detail to add at the end of the film, because not only have we seen this film be a story of the growth of this David Gopil character and the Jenny Agutter character, but we also realize that the young boy, the little brother himself as well, has undergone this real emotional journey from being this little boy to being someone who has to be more emotionally mature because of the certain set of circumstances that has occurred, namely the suicide of his father. So this is an incredibly rich tableau, deep landscape of emotionally complex characters, which is why I think this film is very successful and why this film is very important in the context of the Criterion collection. Okay, so this has been Walkabout. I hope this has been an interesting discussion. If you have any questions or comments, please, at any time, please feel free to leave a comment below. I'd be very happy to talk to you about it. In the meantime, if you are interested, I will be preparing my comments for the next Criterion Collection release, which is Spine number 11. That is the 7th seal. So until then, my friends, I hope you are happy and healthy and well, and I hope you're watching a lot of great movies. All right, take care and cheers.